Good morning, and welcome to this transformative virtual diversity, equity, and inclusion panel, a platform dedicated to fostering meaningful dialogue and inspiring action towards building a more inclusive society. We are thrilled to have each and every one of you here today joining us for this important conversation. Today, as we embark on this enlightening panel, we encourage you to actively engage, share your insights, and be open to learning from one another. Let us harness this power of the virtual event to ignite a collective passion for diversity, equity, and inclusion that will reverberate far beyond these virtual walls. So please leave comments, questions in the chat box so that we can get to those at the end of the panel. We would also like to express our heartfelt gratitude for the sponsors who have generously supported this event. Their unwavering commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion have made this panel a reality and allowed us to come together to have these meaningful conversations. So first, we extend our deepest thanks to Salary.com for supporting this series as a platinum sponsor. We also thank CATA for engaging as a supporting sponsor. We truly appreciate your commitment to fostering a more inclusive and equitable workplace. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Lena Turner with our presenting sponsor, Salary.com, to give an introduction and kick off our event. Lena, take it away.
Hi, Becky. Thanks so much for that. And we at Salary.com are really excited to be partners with Michigan Chamber. We are located in Waltham, Massachusetts, right outside the Boston area. And our mission at Salary.com is to get pay right. We love working with your members and providing information for practitioners to be on their journey to get pay right also. We are happy also really to sponsor series like this because we believe in diversity, equity, inclusion, and building an inclusive workspace. So with that, I am going to say thank you for having me, and I will introduce our facilitator, and we'll get started with this wonderful panel and all the great information that the practitioners have for us today. So our facilitator today is Angela Minacucci. Angela is a partner at Martin Waymeyer, a full-service public relations and digital marketing firm that works with organizations seeking to make Michigan a better place. Prior to coming to Martin Waymeyer, she led communications at the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services and Michigan Association of Counties. She's also a graduate of Michigan State University with a BA in communication and a specialization in public relations. She received her accreditation in public relations and her crisis communications certification from the National Public Relations Society of America. Angela is a Crain's Detroit Business 40 Under 40 Award recipient, Central Michigan Public Relations Society of America Pacemaker of the Year, and a Lansing Regional Chamber of Commerce 10 over the next 10 recipients. Let's welcome Angela.
Thank you, Lena. And I know I sent over a brief bio, but I feel like I need to make it even briefer. I made you read too much. Thank you to the Michigan Chamber for hosting this series. I'm happy to be here today and even happier to introduce our panelists. We've got a really great conversation queued up for you today. So I will start by introducing Diane Antishin. She is Vice President, Human Resources and Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer at DTE and Bridget Hurd, Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer, Inclusion Diversity at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to make sure Bridget and Diane have got their cameras on. Diane, I'll make sure you're good to go. Hi, good to see you both. All right, great. So to get us started today, I'd like to have just a level set conversation about who you are, your background, and your current roles. So Bridget, if you'd like to start, we'll go to Diane after that.
Yes, and good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to participate today. And Diane, it's always a pleasure to be on a panel with you. My background actually is multifaceted in terms of the work that I do. I currently am in the role of Vice President of Inclusion and Diversity and Chief Diversity Officer at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan. Our primary focus on that is around building our culture, and specifically a culture of inclusion, but in also looking at different ways that we engage our employees in our day-to-day interactions. We make cultural competency the foundation of who we are. In addition to my focus on employee engagement, I focus on our efforts to advance health equity, establish our framework for health equity. And that's also a very important part of when we think about inclusion, and especially as it relates to members, that's very important. My previous role here at Blue Cross, I actually led our community responsibility area, and I have 30 plus years, no, well, probably about 30. We'll just leave it at 30 years. 30 years working in the healthcare industry in different roles and capacities. And I also have a background in communications and PR. So
Love that. Thank you, Bridget. Diane, can you give us a little bit of information about your background?
Sure. And I'll echo Bridget's appreciation for allowing me to join and share some insights with all of the audience here today. So thank you so much for having me. So I lead the HR organization at DTE Energy, and I'm also our company's Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer. I've been with DTE about 15 years and joined DTE in the position of Director of Employee Relations following a 20 plus year career in HR and also in manufacturing operations at both General Motors and American Axle and Manufacturing. So spanning a few years in total between automotive and at DTE Energy. I'm married. I have 2 adult sons. Both of them just recently got married here in September and May. So I'm feeling very successful at the moment because I have 2 amazing daughter-in-laws, and we've launched these 2 young men into bright and very, very happy futures. I personally, I'm a first generation college student in my family. My parents came to the United States from Canada. So I feel like I have an immigration kind of story, although most people think of Canada as not all that different from the United States. But I think that part of my childhood and younger life was really kind of instrumental in helping me to think of the world through a different lens, through the perspective of people who are from different cultural backgrounds or different countries. I know that being here in the United States while all of my extended family was in Canada felt different than what I saw my friends and coworkers experience throughout their lives. There was a little bit more of a feeling of isolation and perhaps like, not that strong network and ease to navigate challenges and understand the workings of the world. So I think that was a key to kind of leading me to some of the DEI exploration and growth that I had. Beyond that, I love to read. I love my dog. I love water sports. I love dancing, whether it's fitness dancing or dancing ballroom or just dancing, frankly, anytime music is playing. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you, Diane. I share that with you. I'm also a first generation college graduate, in case my name doesn't give it away, very Italian American upbringing here in Michigan. So let's go ahead and dive into the meat of the discussion today. Let's talk a little bit about how your role has shaped DEI efforts at Blue Cross and DTE Energy respectfully. So I'll turn it over to both of you.
Well, maybe I'll just jump in because Bridget said it first. She said how critical her role is in shaping culture at Blue Cross Blue Shield. And that's how I see our chief responsibility too in the DEI space. The phrase culture eats strategy for breakfast, I think is one that always we should keep at the top of our minds. We can have the best plans on paper, but what people do when no one is watching, AKA another definition for culture, and how we shape people's perspectives on that and the behaviors that we recognize and reward within an organization, all of that as being part of culture, so vitally important. You can't write rules for everything. You can't write processes for everything. It's sort of how do we build the frameworks, the belief systems around people so that they're aligned with what's most important to the company. At DTE, we approach DEI from the perspective that it's not something separate that's done over here that HR is responsible for. It's everyone's responsibility. It's part of what makes us great as employees and individuals at DTE. So we build DEI right into our leadership frameworks, whether that be our leadership principles or our value statements, which we call our service keys. And we ensure that those are the expectations of every single person at DTE Energy. And again, not something that they choose to move over and, oh, I'm going to do DEI work right now. No, it's part of the fabric of everything they do. Just a couple other things that I wanted to mention. You know, we approach our DEI work from a maturity model standpoint. And there's many, many maturity models out there to help kind of guide organizations on their journey. Most of them start with stuff that is kind of like, you can have DEI at a compliance level, like, okay, we have AAP plans, affirmative action plans, we have some basic elements that are necessary for DEI. And then you can move on to programmatic elements. Do you have employee resource groups? Do you have DEI training? Do you have a statement about your purpose for DEI? And then you can move into leader-led DEI, where leaders understand their role in driving diversity, equity, and inclusion within a company, and what is their ownership role, what's their accountabilities in advancing both what I'll call behavioral inclusion and cultural and structural from a systems perspective, from a talent movement. Do leaders understand their role? And then the maturity that we're working towards at DTE, which is everybody owns DEI and everyone understands and knows their role in driving towards greater diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that's how I look at my particular role. I mean, there's obviously a lot more to it and a lot of complexity, and it can be a role where sometimes I say, why did I lean into this? Because the issues, as I think folks know and appreciate, can be really, really sticky, but the rewards on the other side of creating greater diversity and inclusion are just absolutely magical.
Yes, you know, I'm going to echo that. It's totally magical. And I can reflect immediately on, so often we get the question, what are your measures? How do you measure this? And the greatest measures for me is when I receive an email from an employee that is telling me, thank you for all that you do. I feel safe here. Now that's powerful. And we get to that place of psychological safety because we are focused on creating that culture. You know, the same philosophy that inclusion and diversity is each and every one of us. I've been in this role almost 8 years. And one of the immediate things that I noticed upon starting the role, I was walking around talking to different employees, and I'm like, oh my gosh, everyone has a different definition of inclusion and diversity based on their experiences. So that's one of the most important things, I believe, is to make sure that you level set on what diversity means and what inclusion means. Especially now, we know that DEI, that terminology, is extremely politicized. So it's so important to define, what does this mean to me? And to emphasize that diversity is way more than just race and ethnicity, or maybe that gender that we assume about a person, and that it goes deeper than that. It's things like being an introvert or an extrovert in a workplace. And what does that mean? It means whether you're a single parent or you have a family of 5, or maybe you're a caregiver. It's that opportunity to lean in and understand the many dimensions and the many facets, and how each and every one of us, when we come to work, we bring those things with us to work. We bring those identities with us to work. So how do we build and sustain that workplace environment that recognizes each and every one of us, recognizes the person that is in front of us? And when we talk about inclusion, again, we use these big terms. It is that opportunity to really learn, lean in and learn. And I always say learn about different cultures, communities, generations, work styles, and perspectives, and creating an environment where you do that. At Blue Cross, for example, throughout the year, we have more than 100 different learning sessions to learn about the different cultures and communities and generations and work styles and perspectives. And that really opens the door that we consider the different perspectives. It opens our hearts, it opens our minds, and it gives us the chance to bring humanity back into the workplace. And so when I think about how I have an influence and how I am working across the organization, those are some of the key things that come to mind. I'll add one more thing that's fundamental. Again, inclusion and diversity is not any particular individual things that we do. It's all that we do. It's just who we are. And one thing that we do as we look at it systematically throughout the organization, so beyond HR, we have taught the importance of cultural competency. That means leaning in and asking questions about a person in a community, whether we're doing a marketing campaign, whether we're developing a new product. We have new tools that we've focused on, like our pregnancy digital tool to help those who are going through the pregnancy journal. So we ask the questions about, who are the different individuals? Are we inclusive in that? When we looked at menopause, for instance, and the focus on women's health, that it's sometimes not talked about in the workplace. It's that opportunity to lean in and understand what the nuances are. And so those are just some examples of how we have integrated and embedded inclusion and diversity in our various programs and policies and procedures for all areas of the company.
Oh, I love this conversation so far. Okay, let's keep it going. Let's talk a little bit about corporate social responsibility. We hear that term used a lot nowadays. For your organizations, and this question is for both of you, what does that look like in practice? What is your responsibility? What is the responsibility of your employees within their communities and as well? And how do you show that? So I'll turn it over to both of you.
You want me to jump in this time? Well, actually, I led our community responsibility effort. So we actually have a different department that focuses on our community responsibility and our social mission. And it means different things to different companies, but it's really about how do you connect with your communities that you serve, with your stakeholders, and to invest in the appropriate ways to meet the needs and emerging needs of community residents. And so we do that in different ways, from our corporate contributions in support of nonprofit and grassroots organizations to different grant programs that we do through our social mission area. Everything from, we have a program called Building Healthy Communities, for example. And it's that opportunity to support schools and provide access to nutritious breakfast for school children who may go without. We provide funding to our safety net clinics across the state of Michigan. So those are different ways that we step up to engage and partner and support our different community organizations. I can think about how we engage with the LGBTQ+ community, which is another important segment. Recently, we provided funding for the Corktown Health Institute as it begins to develop its mission and its purpose and serve the greater needs of the LGBTQ+ community in terms of healthcare access and healthcare services. So through our employee volunteer programs, we're out in the community. We have all kinds of employee giving, from gleaners to other activities, but some of those activities also focus on experiential employee volunteerism. So that's when we take the opportunity to go into the community and engage with people we may not normally engage with, so that we're learning. We're building that cultural competency. We're leaning in and exposing ourselves to different experiences and different perspectives. So when we say corporate social responsibility, we mean all of those different things.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that question too. So similar to what Bridget described, we think of our corporate social responsibility from the perspective of 4 stakeholder groups. Our investors, our customers, our communities, and our employees. And how are we living our aspiration as a company when we think of those 4 stakeholder groups? And our aspiration as a company kind of is what's driving all of our work from a corporate sustainability perspective. Our aspiration is to be best in the world, meaning be an absolutely top-notch provider of electric and gas services, and do that very, very, very well. for our stakeholders. So be best in the world, but to also be best for the world. And so to look at all of our work from the lens of what are we contributing, what are we giving back, how are we supporting progress broadly across our stakeholder groups. And so our corporate sustainability efforts, which are constantly being, refined and defined, because there's a world of expectations out there that would suggest you should be doing A and you should be doing B and you should be doing C. We have a core set of programs and activities that are central to our ESG efforts, our corporate sustainability efforts. And first and foremost, I think it starts with the environment. As a gas and electric utility company, the energy transformation that's happening all around the country and certainly here in the state of Michigan, and DTE Energy playing a leadership role from an environmental stewardship perspective is absolutely critical. We have a commitment to be net carbon zero by 2050. And so if you live here in Michigan, as I would imagine folks on this Michigan Chamber of Commerce event are, you're seeing the transformation all around you in terms of a move towards greater green energy and retirement of our fossil generation plants. So that's from the environmental perspective. From the community perspective, from the employee perspective, our work in terms of volunteerism, education and employment programs to connect people with barriers to jobs at DTE to successful future potential. Our work from our DTE Energy Foundation, which is our huge philanthropic arm of DTE Energy, providing grants to just hundreds and hundreds of community agencies every year to carry out work that DTE views as critical to lifting up our economy. And then our work from an economic progress perspective and our support of minority suppliers, minority and women suppliers in the community, looking at making strategic investments to lift our entire region is absolutely something that DTE is also focused on. So it's all kind of anchored in this aspiration of being best in the world and then also being best for the world.
Excellent. Thank you both. And Diane, just a note, you got a little quiet in the beginning, so your audio might be catching up when you talk. So
okay, I'll try to lean in a little more. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. And thank you to Taylor. You caught the question in the chat. So I was going to call that out, but she's on top of it, or Taylor, they are on top of it. Okay, so next, when looking at employment through a DEI lens, how do your companies recruit and retain talent across all segments of a community, especially in industries that tend to be dominated by either one particular race or gender or another DEI component? We talked about that a little bit, but I pose that to both of you now as well.
I'll jump in first. So this requires deliberate strategies and tactics. You can't leave diversity to chance because you'll likely just kind of repeat what you have presently. And so if you're looking to close a gap, it requires a deliberate strategy for different outreach and then retention strategies as well. So we're very proactive in reaching out when we have positions, or even when we don't have positions, to build kind of a sourcing pipeline with a number of minority and women organizations. So we have partnerships with Black fraternities and sororities, the National Black MBA, Women in Skilled Trades, Black Employees in Energy. I mean, just the list goes on. And we nurture and build these relationships and ensure that we have a presence at the recruiting fairs and so forth to ensure that we've got a strong outreach arm for our diversity efforts. But beyond that, we've gone further, and one of the programs, one of the activities that I'm most proud of, really launched in 2019, and this is.
Oh no. Seems like we lost Diane. So Bridget, I will ask, we'll jump back to the question. So when looking at employment through a DEI lens, how do you recruit and retain talent, especially in industries that tend to be dominated by one particular race or gender? I'll pose that to you and hopefully we can get Diane back here.
Yes, definitely. And really building on what Diane was saying in terms of having those intentional, deliberate, focused efforts. She's back.
I'm back. I'm sorry. I have no idea when that cut out. Oh boy, all of a sudden I was looking at faces on camera and everyone was very still. I'm sure we've all had that experience. I'm like, I don't think this is live anymore. Could you share, Angela, maybe what you last heard from me, and I'll just pick it up and try to shorten it up as well.
Well, Bridget was just about to start, so let's let her jump in, and then we can head back to you from there.
Yeah, sorry, we were wrapping up when you were saying around fraternities and sororities, and I can kind of build from there.
Please go ahead.
And basically, you know, being intentional and deliberate, and of course, utilizing those traditional forms for recruitment, but then looking at these more, and I'll use the terminology, specialized and focused ways of recruiting. One thing, actually two things we've done over the last several years is looked at community colleges as a place to recruit. So often they're overlooked as part of the process. And we know, again, when we look at the population of college students attending community college is quite diverse, and there is an opportunity to reach a whole lot of potential employees that you normally would not. Also, we do a deep dive on HBCUs, and the HR talent acquisition team is very strategic about this, because what we have discovered is that if they're beyond Kentucky, it's pretty hard to get them up here to the north. And so we look at different ways that we can build the relationships with those HBCUs that are closer to the state of Michigan, where we see that there's more interest and desire to work in the state of Michigan, for example. We also look at individuals and build partnerships with organizations that focus on the neurodiverse, or individuals with disabilities or on the autism spectrum. So we do a deep dive there because we know that that representation is low. In the past couple of years, we have seen an increase in the number of individuals with disabilities who are employed, and that's because of the flexible work arrangements that are in place. However, with that increase, we know that there's still a specific need for that. So we develop those relationships. We also have team members who are specifically focused and designated to build those relationships. So those are some of the tools and the tricks of the trade that we put in place to, again, to make sure that we are intentional, deliberate, and ensuring the representation and the broad representation across our company and in the different areas.
All right, Diane, let's give this a go.
Yeah, again, apologies for the unstable connection. Hopefully, knock on wood here, it lasts here through the rest of our call. But yeah, I was sharing some of the similar strategies and approaches that Bridget was mentioning about our outreach to HBCUs and professional diversity organizations. But one of the stories that I'd love to share with this audience is our work to identify talent for a much needed aspect of our business, and that is the area of tree trim work. And so I think folks are probably very keenly aware that weather patterns have shifted all across the country, across the globe, and certainly here in Michigan, with many, many more high wind events and many more extreme weather events. And one of the keys to improving system reliability is to ensure that trees do not interfere with wires, because when trees are impacted by high weather events and they interfere with wires, that's just more and longer lasting outages. And so in 2019, DTE was looking at how do we tremendously accelerate our work in trimming trees around our power lines to improve system reliability. And we were up against an enormous shortage of qualified tree trimmers that were here locally. In fact, what we were finding ourselves doing was oftentimes bringing in crews from out of state, from well across the country, to help us in the wake of a storm event, or even proactively tree trimming lines. There was just a tremendous shortage. And when you have this, again, aspiration to be best for the world, it challenges your thinking about where do you source for talent? How do you find talent? And at that point in time, we were becoming very keenly aware of the challenges of individuals leaving the criminal justice system in terms of being able to successfully find work. and land careers. And so we had this incredible business need happening kind of at the same time when some efforts at the state level were accelerating the shortening of sentences of people in the prison system, and individuals looking for ways to transition and land successfully in the community. And we had formed at that time a number of partnerships. We were in regular communication with the state and the prison system, and reached out and started talking to the Parnell vocational facility just outside of Lansing about the types of training programs that they had for incarcerated individuals on site. And through some really wonderful thinking of people, again, thinking outside the box, where do you find talent? How can you make a talent match? We were able to successfully put a program inside of the prison. And if you can imagine the complexities of having ladders and chainsaws and other type of equipment brought into a prison facility to train individuals before they were released from their sentence for potential future job opportunities, it really caused a lot of out of the box thinking. Well, that program was a tremendous success, and we continue to create a pipeline so that individuals have jobs waiting for them immediately upon exit from the criminal justice system. And that does a tremendous amount for individuals. It certainly drives down recidivism because individuals have an instant landing spot, an income, and a network to build upon when they transition. But that successful program led us to say, okay, well, how do we expand this to opportunities for individuals who are not within the criminal justice system, but individuals who need an opportunity to learn a skill that can lead to a great paying job. And so we expanded the concept from Parnell to the Detroit Tree Trim Academy, where we're graduating between 60 and 100 graduates a year to take on new tree trimming opportunities. And it's about thinking proactively about talent needs and needs in the community. And when you can bring those two together, we use the phrase magic, but that's where things get really special, because training individuals who are knowing where they're headed and that a job is waiting for them can make all the difference. So really proud of our outreach efforts that are helping us to diversify our workforce.
Excellent. Thank you. Both wonderful ideas. Let's shift a little bit and talk about values. Many studies are starting to show that employees are actively seeking out companies that align with their own beliefs. So which of your company values are your employees most eager to promote? And do you notice any trends with what prospective employees are looking for?
Yes, definitely. I'm just going to bring it back to an environment that is diverse and an environment that is inclusive. One of the privileges I have is the opportunity to be able to welcome our new employees to the company, as well as our summer interns. And I always ask the question, what does diversity mean to you? And it's always very interesting to learn how there are differences in generations. And our younger generations, when they think about diversity, they often say people with different perspectives or people with disabilities, and they don't focus on the race and gender play. So when they're coming into their environment, they're really looking for a place that recognizes their unique contributions and what they bring and can bring to the workplace community. And so it is our intent to definitely reinforce that, to create a place of learning and understanding and sharing of different experiences and perspectives. And so I think that's a fundamental value. And I'm also going to link it back to cultural competency being a cornerstone. We truly believe that if we're culturally competent, it's going to improve how we interact with one another from day to day. And one of my favorite examples is I'm an introvert, for example. And one day during a learning session, I just nonchalantly shared that, just illustrating a different facet of diversity. And after that meeting, there were 25 employees who were lined up to talk to me about how they feel excluded in the workplace because they have some introverted qualities. And so since that time, I talk about quite frequently, and enable introverts to find their place within the work environment. So again, looking at the many facets of diversity and then opening the space for inclusion in our day-to-day interactions. And then the second focus is in terms of cultural competency, in terms of how we can provide the best in customer service for our members. Again, when we become culturally competent, whether it's based on age and leaning in and understanding the nuances with that, or dealing with different cultures in terms of how they access healthcare and healthcare delivery, it provides that opportunity for us to do so in a way that makes a difference for that member. And so it's those kind of opportunities, it's those kind of values that recognizes the uniqueness of every person that truly resonates with our employees and employees that, you know, are thinking about coming to Blue Cross. You know, as interns are here now, and I've had the opportunity to really talk to them as well as learn from them. And those are the kind of values that I'm hearing. They wouldn't work from home too a lot, but
That too.
but I was surprised. We just recently did our organizational alignment survey, our culture survey. And we have about a 5% population of Gen Z, for example. But I was really surprised in terms of our learning sessions. There was the request for in-person sessions again, and it was overwhelming almost in terms of the number of comments that came back, bring back the in-person sessions. And I was really surprised by that. But I think also it really speaks to the importance of connection and being connected in person now that we can in the workplace, and the value that that brings for employees in terms of our well-being and wellness, and again, our everyday interactions. So
I can relate to all that you said there, Bridget. So Angela, in terms of your question, you know, what are prospective employees looking for? What do they value most? How do they want to see their values represented in the company? So I'll just start with the concept of belonging. And Bridget hit on this too, inclusion, belonging. I think that is a core characteristic. It doesn't matter what organization you're a part of in society in general. People want to feel a sense of belonging, a sense of being respected, a sense of being valued and included. And when you can create a culture that drives a feeling of belonging, that's where people's energy rises. That's where you get that discretionary output, if you will, from people, because they feel like they're contributing to something that they've made a contribution to themselves. So belonging is absolutely critical. If you have the opportunity, or if you've studied it in the past, the kind of the neuroscience behind why belonging is so fundamentally important to human beings is kind of cool. I mean, it's all rooted in how we evolved as human beings, and the fact that our very survival going back hundreds of thousands of years depended on belonging and being part of a central kind of group. And so people are fundamentally wired to want that. And how do you create that within an enterprise? And it's again making sure that what's important to others is important to the organization as well. And how do you create that kind of two-way dialogue, and the word that we use, co-creation at DTE, the ability for people to create the future. That stems from listening. It stems from being open to new ideas and perspectives, and how you embed all of that into your values as an organization and build that into just kind of the systems that exist within the company. So again, it's not something separate. I have a just quick story to share, and it was one of those aha moments for me when I heard about this as a leader of HR about 6 years ago. Maybe it was a little bit 6-7 years ago. Anyway, we were doing some recruiting of, in-demand engineers, and we were at the University of Michigan, a key talent portal for talent. And this was a young, very, very well-credentialed student at U of M, Hispanic. And just, we were so thrilled to have her on our interview list. And the leaders, I wasn't in this particular leader, but the story of this interview kind of spread quickly throughout DTE, because the leader approached the interview much as we had all of our interviews of students on campus that day. We started with, oh, provide us your background. And then we went into a series of behavioral-based interview questions. And this young woman, who I'm very proud to say is still with us at DTE, that we hired successfully and is helping to shape our activation from our aspiration best in the world every day. But she turned the interview table right around on that leader that was interviewing her and started asking questions about how we as a company were involved in our community and how we were activating from a volunteerism perspective, and what opportunities would she have to contribute beyond the role that she was applying for at DTE. And when I heard this story, it was like all of the stuff that we were reading about corporate social responsibility and how young people want more than a job and a paycheck. They want to contribute. It all became crystallized in the experience of that leader interviewing that young high potential candidate from the University of Michigan. Because if we don't, as employers, have that, we are going to lose out on talent. If we don't have a company that's socially responsible, that's connected to causes that are important to those candidates that we're seeking to bring into the organization, they're going to feel that disconnect and they're going to go elsewhere where their contributions can be broader and more than the job that they're doing just 9 to 5. So.
Well, that's an excellent segue into our next question. I am going to ask probably just this last one, and then there's some good conversation happening in the chat, some good questions that popped up. So we'll go ahead and jump into those next. But kind of building off of if the value alignment isn't there, there's a phrase that I'm sure many of our participants have heard today called quiet quitting, which is already becoming a highly charged expression. So considering that many members of the workforce are looking to be valued for their work and within their workplaces, how do you avoid having employees fall into that quiet quitting space? And how do you create a space where employees are valued and recognized?
Yeah, you know what, I want to build on something that Diane mentioned with the concept of belonging. And I've been busy working on a presentation I have to do probably next week in terms of the connection between inclusion and diversity and wellness and well-being, employee well-being. And a statistic that I came across is that over 40% of Americans say they feel lonely or alone at work. So just think about that. Think about that being, this is a place where we spend a lot of hours each and every week. And 40% say they feel lonely or alone at work. When I hear a statistic like that, I see it as an opportunity to really go deep with the inclusion and diversity strategy. Ask the questions about why is someone feeling lonely? What is it about the environment, the workplace? Are they not being seen or felt? And it could be simple and little things. And I think back several years ago, we had a learning session and we were talking about the Arab American culture. And the speaker, and I did see a question about recommendations for speakers, and I say use real people in our communities, use employees to share their experiences and perspectives. But the particular speaker that was just talking about the history of Arab American. And as part of that, so often we have an ideal of what an Arab American looks like. And the speaker mentioned the fact that Sudan is an Arab country. And after that session, the employee came up to me with just a huge level of gratitude. She said, "Thank you so much. No one ever talks about Sudanese people and that they're a part of the Arab community." And as a result of that, I really felt seen and valued. And so when we think about creating that environment where we can all show up and be authentic, where we have coaching programs in place for all levels in the organization, and we're making it easy to participate in those programs. When we're implementing our employee resource networks that create a safe place for individuals who are part of a particular identity or their allies, it's that opportunity to create an environment where we're not alone or we don't feel lonely, but we feel seen and again, valued for our unique contributions. And my focus is totally inclusive. we have, well, we only have 11 employee resource networks, but in that 11 employee resource networks, there's an opportunity for all of our races and ethnicities to be uplifted and learned about and create some understanding and awareness. So when I think about the workplace culture and I think about the opportunity around quiet quitting, those are some initial things that I think about. And then very quickly, one other thing is the importance of inclusive leadership, making sure that our leaders really understand how we value inclusion and diversity and what their role is. Harvard Business Review shares that up to 70% of what a leader does can impact whether an employee feels valued or not and included. So we have a huge responsibility. I won't go in detail, but I will leave one tip. Deloitte University, and you may have seen it already, they have 6 traits of inclusive leadership that I use internally that help to guide what constitutes leaders who demonstrate that inclusive behavior. So that's something to check out if you're not familiar with it. And then there's one more other thing too. And I wrote this one down so I don't forget. High impact diversity is fairness and respect, valued and belonging, safe and open, empowered and growing. And if we have those things in place, maybe we can address some of the quiet quitting, but we know that we're all kind of burnt out right now. So, which is a contributing factor too.
Well, on that one, I think Bridget's response was fantastic. You covered a lot of territory there. I would just add that the phrase quiet quitting, while it's kind of new and current, it's not different than what organizations have been, battling and trying to improve for years. So you use the phrase retired on the job, or somebody who's just coasting along, et cetera, or a poor performer, whatever it is. And I think that the key really lies, again, in creating a culture that helps to ensure that employees feel valued, respected, included, so that sense of belonging is there. And we know as an energy company that when people feel that, their energy rises, and the potential for quiet quitting or retired on the job or whatever it may be just diminishes when people feel that sense of belonging. And that can be delivered in so many ways in the organization through all of the things that Bridget described, from programmatic kind of structural things that are built into what you deliver as an organization for the employee experience, and then the leadership behaviors and the cultural kind of imperatives that are embedded in your values, and how you bring that to life each and every day creates that sense of belonging and diminishes any possibility for the quiet quitting or retired on the job or whatever it may be.
Oh, well, that's perfect. We've got a couple of questions about senior leadership in the chat from some panelists or some participants. So let's start there. How do you get leadership to buy into and be active in DEI efforts? I'd love to hear your experiences and or thoughts around that.
Yeah, and I'll go and I'll be brief. There are different tools you can use. One tool is the Intercultural Development Inventory, which I'm actually an administrator for, and it's a tool that leaders can take to understand where they fall in terms of cultural competency. And to get the results, they actually have to have a one-on-one with me, which really opens the door to very honest and candid conversations. So that's one way of beginning to introduce them to it. I'll go back and say level setting, then doing that IDI tool, for example, and really helping to make sure they understand what this really means. And I can't emphasize that enough. Making sure there's understanding of what all of this means is so important.
Yeah, and I would just add, so I think what Bridget's describing and sort of self-awareness of where an individual is on a cultural competency scale can help to pull them in further. But I think what needs to be understood well within any organization, and I hate to use this phrase because it sounds trite, but the business case for DEI. like there are still organizations out there who aren't making the connections that I was emphasizing throughout, that when people feel valued and included, their energy rises, their productivity rises, their output rises, and more diverse, equitable, and inclusive companies outperform less diverse, equitable, and inclusive companies. That research, that study is undeniable. Those studies, excuse me, are just absolutely undeniable. And so if you're part of an organization where that connection to the fundamental bottom line of the organization hasn't been made yet, it may be difficult to get a leader into an IDI kind of a cultural inventory thing, helping understand that the results of all of this effort make the organization stronger is just a fundamental part of engaging leadership.
Excellent. And building off of that, let's talk about a little bit more training programs, or maybe some programmings internally that you offer or would recommend that other corporations or organizations consider building into their DEI efforts as well. Bridget, I think you had mentioned that there are some best practices or tactics you want to share. We talked about IDI. Any others that you all would want to mention?
Yeah, as I mentioned, we do actually in 2022, we did 152 learning sessions, and there are only 2 that we require. And we have a cultural competency learning session for all employees. So as new hires come into the company, this is our foundation, it's our cornerstone. So we have an expectation that you start there. After that, the choice is yours in terms of how you want to engage and learn about other cultures, communities, generations, work styles, and perspectives. The other thing that we require is unconscious bias education, seeing that as a responsibility for leaders. And so that is something that we require for our organizations. Actually, I develop and give that internally. So that's another tool that we use. We partner with our ERNs to have learning sessions. We have all kinds of learning sessions on transgender 101, gender pronoun utilization, Scandinavian heritage. We've done Scottish heritage. What month is this? This is June, so it's Pride Month. Last month was Jewish Heritage Month. And in May, Asian Pacific Heritage Awareness Month. So we really leverage all of those different opportunities to learn. And we really believe, again, the more we learn about others, the more comfortable we will become with others. And the more we begin to erase a little bit of the unconscious bias that we all carry in one way or another as human beings. And so that's our approach in terms of our various learnings.
Yeah, I wish I could add a whole bunch of new stuff to that, but our approach is not too different from what Bridget described. So at DTE, we have fundamentally 2 required DEI training courses. We have an intro to DEI that every employee is taking as a new hire into the company. And it's simple, if you will, in terms of some very basic concepts, things that I described about why belonging is so important and why energy increases when people feel valued, included, and respected. So we've got kind of a very, very basic course. And then we have a more detailed course. It's actually a Korn Ferry product called Conscious Inclusion, which goes through 7 different aspects of creating greater inclusion within an organization and helping individuals understand their role in it, defining things like bias and what's unconscious bias, etc. But the activation from our broad network of employee resource groups, I think, is one of the most powerful ways that people can learn about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So through our employee resource groups, and we have 9 of them, these are, the Power of Pride, our LGBTQIA employee resource group, women, veterans, Black American employee resource groups, a gamut across the diversity spectrum. Through the type of educational, learning, and networking events that are sponsored by these employee resource groups, employees learn from their peers, people that they know. It creates authentic storytelling and connections in a way that a training module can never really do. So I think it does need to be a blend of those types of learning opportunities.
Great. Thank you both. I feel like we could spend another hour or two on this topic. There are things we haven't even touched on, such as how do you balance the needs of employees and maybe their desire to work remote and employee socialization, and even as far as white supremacy culture. That was one of the questions in the chat, but I know we're getting really tight on time. So I'm just going to ask each of you to just leave us with your final thoughts. If you could ask or give the audience one takeaway from this conversation here today, what would that be? And then also, thank you for your time. Thank you for your insight and the work that you're doing at your respective organizations. If you'd be willing to chat with any member of the Michigan Chamber participants, please feel free to let them know how they might be able to reach you after today.
Yes, well, I will say that there are many nuances to this work, and we definitely didn't cover a lot of them. There's the culture piece and understanding the multifacetedness of diversity, but then there's the diversity representation piece that requires specific intentional actions. I had an aha moment several years ago, and probably 2 years into this work, and I really thought about it, and I was reflecting. And it came to me that diversity and inclusion is really equal to empathy and compassion. And if we can step into this work and encourage everyone in our organizations to step into supporting inclusion and diversity from this perspective, because it definitely opens up the opportunity to learn about others, to get people out of the box, and to continue to welcome new perspectives and new experiences. And so that's what I'll leave everyone with today.
Well, just a couple thoughts, and maybe hearkening back to some ideas that I was sharing earlier. Just this idea again that culture is strategy for breakfast, and understanding sort of what are you building into your cultural frameworks within the company, your values, your aspiration, your purpose as a company, the things that you hearken back to regularly, your leadership principles. Where does DEI live in that, so that that accountability to lean into diversity, equity, and inclusion is everywhere around employees? I think that is just so important. If a DEI program is owned by, I will say HR, because it oftentimes is, and it just resides there and it's programmatic and something that somebody must engage in periodically, and then they go back and live their lives and do their work without that in their mindset all the time. I think that the progress will be limited within the organization. So keep in mind that the soft stuff that we've been talking about here for the last hour is really the hard stuff. And I fundamentally believe that it drives superior business results. So I just leave folks with those thoughts.
I'll add soft skills are the top skills of the really now and the future. So it's not something to take for granted. It's much needed in today's work environment and in our society today.
Wonderful. Thank you both. This has been a very informative session. Many of the participants agree.